Right, today we're going to start talking about political parties. Right, this whole section, this whole chapter is a chapter on linkage institutions, right? And so we've discussed the media as a linkage institution. One of the things to keep in mind is that this chapter is a linkage institution. Focus on linkage institutions are those institutions that are external to government. So we're talking about the media, we're talking about political parties, we're talking about interest groups. And then as we move through the next chapters, we'll start talking about linkage institutions as part of government, right, from the inside. So again, the focus is always on how this all ties together so that this is a working republic and democracy, right? So we're talked a little bit about the obligations and perspectives and processes of the media in the information and communication and investigative realms. Today we're going to move to start talking about probably the most important external institution to government, and that is political parties. Political parties, it's hard to overstate their impact into the political system. But we do need to keep in mind and realize that these are institutions that exist wholly as associative organizations outside of government, and then provide an organizing influence to those folks that get elected to government. So let's talk a little bit about what political parties are, what they do, right? I've spent some time with that. So, right, as you've probably come to expect, we'll start off with the definition, right, about what political parties are and define them for us. And so it's pretty easy, right, pretty clear-cut definition. It's a team of people, a group of people, substantially, right, like-minded, that are seeking as a group to come together and control government. And the method that this group uses to control government is to win political office, right? To win an election and put a party member, right, in government to help, right, lead decision-making, policy-making, debate from the perspective of that individual and the political party that individual associates with. So again, the major focus here is it's a team of people trying to control government by winning an elected office, or even an appointed office for that matter, but generally an elected office in government. So they're getting right actually on the inside of government to help control where it is and what it's doing. So the first and primary concern of a political party, right, is to win an election, right, to get their members in government, into a decision-making role in government, right? Not an advisory role, not an advocacy role, right? They're wanting to, as a party, have their members win elections so they are serving in government. This, right, definition and this specificity here on their core function is important because our next linkage institution we're going to talk about is interest groups. And interest groups and political parties look and act a lot alike. But interest groups, right, aren't focused on winning elections to control government. They're not trying to control government at all. They just want their policy, right, their issues ruled on in their way. They want their results from government. Whereas, so we're not talking so much about results for political parties. We're talking about winning an election so that you can control government. The assumption is that if you control government, you will then get the policies you want. But you worry about that as a political party later. And so this focus on getting your group's membership elected into office is the real defining part of what a political party is. Um, so that's the process and definition that describes a bit of the process of what political parties do and why they're there. They serve as a linkage institution, and probably the most important linkage institution that we have, because of the fact that they actually are engaging as party members, as citizens, with citizens, to develop, manage political candidates, to help run and assist with campaigns and elections, and then if they're successful, to control government and the development of government policy on the back end, in government. So political parties span pretty much the entire democratic experience in our republic. So they link us as citizens with the government in a lot of different ways, and help determine what government's going to do in a lot of different ways. And so, in that sense, I think it's fair to argue that they're, if not the most important, certainly one of the most important ways that we get linked together with our government, and involved with our government. So, what do they do, What is it? Where is it that they come into play for this, the first place you're going to see this is where people decide if a party is a as an influential group, is a group that they want to join, is a group that speaks to them and makes sense to them. At some secondary point down the road, those party members may decide, you know what, I'm ready to take the next step and not just associate with the party, but try to win office as a member of a political party. And so then you'll shift over into campaigning, and then and all the while, people are looking at the party and the party's members and the party's candidates as indications for if we elect these folks, how is government going to run? What is government going to do? How are they going to lead us? And then, you follow up with that with the party member actually getting into government, and now they are literally the embodiment of representation for those voters, and they're in government and they're trying to make decisions, and they're voting on policy, they're voting on implementation, they're directing attention based upon policy passage and based upon the monies that they appropriate for policies. And then, those members, if they run for re-election, are going back into the campaign process and engaging with voters again. And if the voters are paying attention, then that re-election campaign is offering an opportunity for advice, consent, criticism, accountability of that person in government. So the party forms the basis for all of this to happen. Part of it, of course, stems from what we've discussed in the past with this majority rule perspective, that it's going to lead to groups organizing so that they can try to become the majority influence in government and make decisions. So it's almost harder to try to figure out how a political party is not a linkage institution, because almost everything that it does and is involved with is pulling people closer to their government and putting people into government and then holding government accountable to what the people want. So as a voter and as a citizen, if you're not looking at these political parties and understanding their importance and how you need to develop a relationship with a party to have influence, you're kind of missing a lot of the point of how this works. Now, we may not like parties having that much of a say or that much of an influence, and we might think that does some bad things to government, and I would think that that's absolutely true. We can certainly tease some of that out, but you can't deny that these parties are critical, right, in tying all this together and helping this disjointed democratic republic function, right? So, they help us pick policymakers. They help by identifying, who their primary folks are and where they're going. And that's certainly a perspective, right? That you could make a good argument for. There's no other system that is necessarily by design better. Right, each of the systems, representative systems that we look at, and the party systems that operate with them, have their pluses and minuses. And certainly a two-party system is weak in a lot of areas, especially when you're looking at the breadth of representation that comes out of it, right? And the breadth of ideas that make it into discussion and development as far as policy goes. Those are certainly some large areas of accurate criticism that would exist on a two-party system. But even if you were to look at a multi-party system in the sense of 3, 5, 12, whatever parliamentary system that allows even more, you're still going to have a lot of the same suckitude, right, that would exist in some of those systems too, right? And we in a sense are, when we're using parties as proxies for what people think, and as a way to kind of focus interest and focus strength of association into government, you're always going to run into some of these problems, and we as a group have to decide what's going to work with us or not. So, Robert, you're definitely hitting on something there, right? And it's good to be aware that this is not clean, concise. And we lost you, right? System that works all the time, right? It's certainly got some pain points, pressure points, right, in there as we try to make it work. And it's, those are easily identifiable. So, and we'll talk about them as we move through it. So the idea here, right, behind this is that these parties act as an integral part of, right, getting decision makers into government, and they do. Which leads us to try to think a little bit about that, what their goal is, right? What the process is going to develop around that goal, because of who they are. So, a guy named David Easton. All right, well, all of a sudden doubting myself, but Easton comes up with this idea of what's called a rational party model as a way of trying to tease out the important parts of an organization whose main core function is to win elections. If that's true, which we just defined it as, right, that's what the core function of parties is, to win elections, then how should that function determine what a party looks and acts like? Which is an interesting question, right? If you're telling me that a political, and I am, right, that a political party's job is to win elections, that's its core functions, then if we were to develop that political party with that goal in mind, how would they act? What would be the most rational, efficient economic model that would apply to that party and how they do things? And so Easton tries to do this for us. He says, okay, let's put a model together that's based on, right, rationality in the sense, which is right, a rational model is any model that's going to look at the economics of a design, the efficiencies and effectiveness of design. So, right, what's the cost benefit design that's going to go into this kind of perspective? And he says, okay, so political parties' core function is to win elections. If that's what drives and motivates this organization to do what they do, then wise parties, right, successful parties, right, that are going to win, obviously are going to develop their candidates and their policies and their perspectives to align with the majority of voters, right? You want to win election, you got to get more than 50% of the votes. And so to do that, your message to those voters ought to be what 50% of the voters plus one or more want, right? If your goal is to win, then define yourself on winning perspectives. So let me give you a little example of what we're talking about. Remember, so we've talked about political polling, right? We've talked about ideology. So we've got, right, say we go out and we do a public opinion poll and we ask everybody in the country where you fall on the ideological spectrum, what are your political beliefs. We give them the political compass, right? And so we see their scores. And you got the far end of right on the left and the far end on the right. And if there's a normal distribution of political opinions and perspective in the United States or in Texas or in Austin, right, you're going to get a graph that looks like this, right? And you're going to say, okay, well, here's the range, right? A few people over here on the far leftist side of things and a few people over here on the far rightish side of things. But most of the people, right, in the center, right? We've got a distribution. So there's your center line, and we'll assume that, 50%, right? Drawing with the mouse is not the easiest, right? 50% of the people are on this side of the line and 50% of the people on this other line, right? So you're going to, right, take our public opinion polling, take our statistics, and once you do all this, here's the lay of the land as far as what people believe ideologically. So if a party wants to win election and they look at this distribution of people's ideology, they know that they need to be somewhere, right? Probably in this area, right? Because if this half of the line, right, going this way is 50%, that's not enough to win. And the same thing going this way, right, to the right, that's not enough to win. So they've got to define themselves somewhere close to the center line so that they can draw, sorry, you can't see, define themselves somewhere close to the center line so that when an election happens, their candidates can draw support from one whole side plus some on the other side, one whole side plus some on the other side. Which means if you're going to be logical about this as a party, you will define yourself near the center of the ideological spectrum. That's how you win, right? If you make yourself a radical or extremist on the left or right side, the votes you're competing for are much smaller, right? Which means you're not going to win. So you got to be close to where most of the people are. And so that's the logic behind, right, a rationalist approach to winning elections and why it's going to determine what policies as a party you pick for yourself. Now, lo and behold, when we go out and we do this, and then we do the same thing for finding out where the political parties are, we find that the Democrats are, as a party, generally here, and Republicans, to be accurate, are a little further away, but generally here, right? Are there some Republicans way out here? Yeah, and there's some Democrats way out here. Right, I did that. That shouldn't be an R. That should be, right, a C for conservative. This is liberal and for conservative. This is Democrat, Republican, right? unfortunately, I can't, if I click the eraser, everything will go away. So I don't think there's a way. Yeah. So, I bet I can do this. Hold up. Ooh. I can clean that up a little bit that way. Right, we can get a C over there instead of an R. So the idea here, right, is that these parties are going to have to define themselves close enough to the center, right, that they can be competitive with one another. Unfortunately, right, if you're seeing yourself right out on the ends, there we go, out on the ends, right, where you might see, say, a green party over here, right? American Socialist, right in here close to them, right? That shouldn't spill gas, right? There's maybe a good bunch of libertarians are going to find themselves over here, although it wouldn't be impossible for some of them to find themselves over here, right? I'm going to spill that out a little bit. We'll give them a libertarian, right? These folks, right, are not going to have as much opportunity to compete for the majority of the people are, and so that's going to be problematic for them, right? And that's what this argument is saying here from Easton, right? Is that, hey, right, if your core function is to win elections, then you've got to define yourself close to the center so that you can be electable. And if we look at the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and the range of difference between them, they are different, right? They're not the same. They don't espouse the same policies, but they're also not terribly far from the center. The Republican Party is moving a little faster to the radical right of the spectrum than the Democrats are moving to the radical left. They are both starting to drift away from the center, which means that they're expanding the base that they're trying to appeal to, but they're still having to stay close enough that they're a viable elective party. And if either party goes too far off, they'll stop getting people elected routinely. Now, part of it is the party defines itself as one way, and candidates define themselves even as members within the party that a little differently. So, where the party may be drifting off for the Republicans to the right or to the left for the Democrats, as a whole, there'll certainly be people running for office under either of those two labels that will be a lot closer to the center. And so Easton says this is what we should expect, right? The other thing that comes out of this that's really interesting is that the philosophy of the party, the political and policy stances of the party are secondary, generally speaking, to winning elections. So if at any point a policy or perspective, a philosophy your party has becomes unelectable, becomes too far to the margin of left or right, a rational party will discard that policy and philosophy and pick something that's more electable, right? So the message, the heart and soul, right, the policy perspective of the parties are negotiable under this kind of model of how things ought to work, right? If your ultimate goal is to win, then who you are and how you categorize yourself, how you define yourself is negotiable too, right? You've got to go wherever the center of the electorable part of the polity goes. And that's a really cynical perspective of what political parties are, right? But it's one that takes this idea that winning elections is their core function to its logical ends as an argument. Do the parties do this? Do they redefine themselves behind what's winnable and jettison those things that become an albatross or an anchor, right, to their electable fortunes? Sometimes, right? Sometimes, yes, we can see this, right? And then that puts them in a difficult position when they get it, they do win, and they've espoused a political philosophy that's on to an extreme, right, or not as extreme as people want, too far to the center, and then you're expected to go make policy in that area and find out it's not supportable in the long term. So this is a challenge for parties as an accurate linkage institution if they, right, solely focus on winning elections. But if your goal is to control government, winning elections should be your primary goal. Does this make sense? I think it's an interesting argument, right? I think it's a different way of trying to look at things for what guides party behavior and party perspective. We should never forget that just like the media is now a business and business interests help drive their decisions, political parties are aimed at winning elections and will say what they need to say to try to do that. All right, so let that set and marinate for a little bit, and let's kind of talk about a different topic here on political parties. Let's talk a little bit about when we dig on into the insides of a political party and look at its internal structure, what do we see? Right? We've got these big ideas about what they're trying to do, but how are they organized? What are the parts that we can identify within a political party? And there are two places that you can look, and you'll see different parts depending upon where you look. We're going to look at parties within the state and how they operate within the state. And it makes a lot of sense to do this because the organizations of parties are twofold. At the top level, right, nationally, there's a Democratic and a Republican National Committee, and there's probably a Libertarian National Committee in some sense, where they're trying to organize across the country. But parties as functioning organisms are developed, designed, and work in the states. And the laws of each of the 50 states have a big say about how that's going to happen. And so really to understand how a party's working on a day-to-day basis, you need to look at how it's working in the state. And so in Texas, what this means is recognizing that the impact of Texas's perspective on political parties and how people look at them here in Texas. We can identify three distinct areas that belong to a political party that help organize a political party. And I've got a slide on each of these, so we will move through those independently, but right, they're listed here so you can see them all at the same time. So we're going to talk about the political party from what the electorate is. We're going to talk about the political party as an internal hierarchical kind of designed organization. And then we're going to talk about the party as a function within government. So the first one here is party in the electorate. And this is talking about all of those people that are electors in the sense of can participate by voting in an election, right? All of those people that are voters and as a voter identify as a party member of some kind, right? Green, Libertarian, Democrat, Republican, whatever, right? Whatever the party might be. And so to get a little bit of a handle on who these folks are, right? You kind of need to know how it is they come to join a party. And in some states, right, it's a very defined official process. There's paperwork involved and, right, maybe even some membership dues or something like that. Texas isn't like that at all. How do you join, say, the Democratic Party in Texas? Anybody know? Do you have to go to an official Democratic Party meeting and take an oath of some kind? You have to vote for the party, is what Reuben's putting out there, right? You join the party by voting by the party. So that's certainly a very clear indication that you support those candidates. But let's say, Reuben, I'm going to just put myself out there and say, I'm making this up, right? I'm going to say I am a Green Party member running for office. What you're saying is that if you vote for me, you too are a Green Party member. So what happens when people, maybe I'm running for House member and they vote for me, but then they vote for somebody from the Republican Party for Senate member, and they vote for a Democrat for governor? What party they belong to? Because people do that, right? People split their votes between parties all the time, right? Depending upon the candidate and the office, and right. So voting is a good indicator, maybe, especially if you look at somebody's ballot and you see that they're voting consistently and continually for one party. That might be a good indicator. But right, what if you're voting for me, the Green Party person, and then somebody else from a different party, and what party do you belong to? Right. So there's obviously some room there outside of voting for this identification case thing they're in the middle. Maybe they just voting for people that they know and like, right? Maybe they're not looking at policy at all. In Texas, right, there is no process. There's nothing that you do, either right, objectively or otherwise, that defines you as belonging to a party, right? Your vote may or may not give some indication. You may say something one or another. I could believe that. Probably if you ran for office as a party representing a party, that's probably the clearest sign that you belong to a party. But we even have, that's probably the best. People donate money to parties, right? That's a pretty good indicator, except we also know that people donate to more than one party at a time. So that's a little, right? Even that's not clear cut. In Texas, about the only thing that we can definitively say about who these people are that belong to a party are to take them at their word when they say they do. In Texas, you join a political party by identifying in your head that you're a member of that political party. That's about all we got, right? There's not, because we have like a semi-open or semi-closed, however you want to look at it, approach to even primary voting. You can't even look at primary votes as a way to do it, right? A primary is when a party is putting up only members of their party to see who's going to be selected to represent their party in a general election for a particular office. And in Texas, let's say I'm a Republican and I go to the primaries in Texas, and when I walk in the door at the poll, they ask me, which primary do you want to vote in? And I tell them, give me a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot or a Libertarian ballot. Although Libertarians quite often don't run a primary. And so, right, this year I could say, give me a Republican ballot. Next time, 2 years or something down the road, I could say, give me a Democratic one, right? Because we have people that consider themselves to be a member of one party that might vote in the other party's primary as a way to try to pick really bad candidates to run in the general election and trying to sabotage the other party's candidates, right? So all we have in Texas, right, is personal identification. You join a party by saying, I'm a member of the party. Other things might help lend some credence to that, but that's about all we got in Texas. So the party in the electorate is made up of those people who identify and consider themselves members of the party, which means the party doesn't even really know who all their members are. Kind of crazy, but that's true. It's the way it is, right? It's not always that way in other states. They do it differently, but in Texas, we don't do that. So the party in the electorate is based upon what you think is the party you belong to. The second part is this party as an organization, right? And so this one is more looking at the internal workings of the party as an organization. So you look at, say, the Democratic Party and you say, well, who are the people that are the movers and shakers? Who are the people that are making this organization work? Who are the people that are in leadership positions? And so when you identify them, you're starting to identify what we call the permanent party organization. It's that group of people who have an office or a title, a position that they hold within that party that helps them, right, get things done. Ignore this page number. I keep forgetting to pull that out. Let me make a note. In that case, what you're looking at is, say, the Democratic Party has a Democratic state chairperson. The districts, right? They divide the state up into districts, into precincts, into counties, and they may have Democratic chairs at the county level or the precinct level that they've appointed and or elected to help organize and run the party at that level of government in the state. Those folks that are holding those kind of identifiable positions would be permanent party organization members. Finishing my note there. So in that sense, right, you can identify them in that way. And so you've got a limited number of people that are here, right? State level chairpersons, the state level board that works with that chairperson, right? You've got county level. Within the county, there are 4 precincts, and quite often you'll have some precinct level organization where there's an office with a phone number and people are manning that 4 or 5 days a week or something. Those folks that you could point out there would be folks in the permanent party organization. They're working for the party year-round, day-to-day basis, organizing and running the party as an organization, right? The second part of the party organization is the temporary part. And so these are the folks that volunteer their time and effort at times of high demand for party work. So as candidates are running for office for primary elections or running for office in general elections, the party is going to be gearing up to support those candidates from their party. And they're going to have a lot of volunteers who identify with the party, volunteer their time and their effort and their money to support these candidates, to help run the party's perspective and of what's going on at that time and support those folks that are running for office. Interestingly enough, these volunteers will also quite often be the same people that volunteer at the precinct and county level to actually help run the elections, right? You'll have, right, a few people at the state level and the county level that's their job to organize and get this going, but most of the folks that you see when you go to vote are volunteering their time to help run that election. Right? They get trained by the state and things like that, but right, they're there and they're only there during the election time. And most of them are also, right, this temporary part of a party, right? They're Republicans and Democrats and Greens and Libertarians that are volunteering their time, not only to work on behalf of their party, but then to work on behalf of the state as a whole so that we can have, right, people in place to help run those elections. Now, they're not the only ones that do that, right? A lot of a lot of state and county employees, city employees, right, that this is part of how they help get things done. Those folks will volunteer their time as well, right? And then citizens can too. But a whole lot of those folks, if they're right, their motivation is to get government that they want, and so if they're willing to volunteer their time to work at polls, they're probably volunteering their time to work for the parties that have the same ideological perspective that they do. So we see a lot of overlap there. But notice these people come and go, right? When you're ramping up during a campaign to an election, they're called upon to come do work and volunteer. And once those elections are over, they go away, right? They go back to using their free time for something else besides politics necessarily. So a lot more people in this part of the party, but it's also very transitory. Right? A much smaller number that are working on the permanent side of things, right, to help the party on a day-to-day basis. Which brings us to the third element that we can look at for parties and their organization, that's party and government. And this is very simple. These are the folks that identify with the political party and have been elected and or appointed to a public office. Okay, it's that simple. Almost all public offices in Texas are either elected or appointed. And so you look at the leadership of state agencies, you look at the leadership in state government, right? Those are all either elected or appointed. The judges in Texas, right, elected. And so in those areas where party affiliation will play a part, right? Having affiliated with a particular party could get you a job, could get you elected, could get you appointed, right? If you go and look at, say, since they're in the news, the Public Utility Commission, the folks that run the public, that are appointed as chair people of the Public Utility Commission are appointed by the governor to those positions, right? And part of their job is to regulate the energy prices in Texas, and in that sense extend some control over the Energy Reliability Council of Texas. But those folks are appointed by the governor, which means the governor making those decisions to appoint somebody is going to use identification with political party as one of the first and most important elements about who they're going to look at. Republican Governor Abbott is going to appoint Republican people, right, to manage these state agencies that have the same political philosophy and perspective, or at least as close as he can find to what he believes, right? So all of those appointed positions are almost certainly going to be Republican. And then Texas being a generally Republican-dominated state, a lot of the elected offices are going to be Republican. Those folks are considered party in government, right? They're in Texas, generally speaking, the Republican Party in government. There are some Democrats obviously elected to office as well, and so they're representing the Democratic Party in government. But the overwhelming similarity here is that they've been appointed and are elected to one of those positions. One thing that I'll bring out here is in identifying the parts of the party this way, none of these three groups are mutually exclusive. In other words, you could, as an individual, be in each of these three parts, right? So look at Governor Abbott, elected to office as a Republican. Holding the office of governor, he is the de facto political leader in Texas of the Republican Party, right? Doesn't hold an official position in that sense, that, right? But if you want to know where the Republican Party is going and what they're doing and what their ideology is, you probably don't ask the chairperson of the state party. You look at what the governor's saying. You ask the governor, right? Because he's going to be the prime leadership. So in that sense, right, he's part of government the party in organization because he's leading that organization. Could also be, right, actually filling a chairperson seat or helping work an election, whatever, right? So he's part of the government, party in government, part of the party in organization. And he wouldn't be a Republican if he didn't, right, if he wasn't party in the electorate, right? He's already identified himself as a Republican, right? And therefore took off on this political career from that perspective. So you can be all three of these, and right, or you can be just one, right? But those are different ways of identifying how the party organizes and what it gets done. Does that make sense? Okay. Indeedy do, Samantha. Okay. Let's talk a little bit now about how parties effectively work to make elections important or to continue elections as status quo, and how we as voters play a part in determining the effectiveness and the efficiency of political parties. Parties over time, right, are those places that we as voters and we as candidates, right, choose for ourselves and as a identification of who we are politically and what we want policy-wise. And as political scientists, we watch, right, how people are aligning themselves with parties, in parties, or away from parties, and what the impacts of that alignment are. So as we're considering ideas like party in the electorate or party in government and how that applies to people, we as political scientists are looking at the run-on effects of that. And trying to pay attention, right, to where those alignments are happening and whether those alignments are getting stronger and larger, or whether the fortunes of the party are getting smaller and less effective. And so every time we have an election, we get a snapshot in time of the effectiveness and pervasiveness of a political party. And in that sense, right, because we have states like Texas that don't really have a good way of identifying people as belonging to a party or not, we do, right, as Ruben pointed out, from a perspective, look at how they voted for particular offices, right? While it's hard to say if you vote this way, you are this, right? And there, as I mentioned, some problems with that. From a big perspective, right, we can compare election to election to election and see, right, the progress or decline of a political party by looking at how voters align under that party during election times. So three things we're going to talk about when we look at alignments with political party alignments by voters is three effects. Is we're going to look at critical elections, we're going to look at party realignment, and we're going to look at a thing called party de-alignment. And the first thing we're going to talk about is a critical election. Critical elections are fairly difficult to understand. And the reason why is we don't know when an election is a critical election until much later. So we just had a presidential election, right, and elected a Democrat as president. We don't know what that tells us about the fortunes of the political parties right away. It's at this point in time, right, on the presidential election, right, and then even in the senatorial elections, the Democrats right, won some influence and power, but they lost a little bit in the House. Is the Democratic Party growing? Is it getting more powerful? Is this something we should expect to see as a trend? Was right this election at the state and federal level in 2020 a critical election? An election that is now going to define the political party as the ascendant party in American politics, and we don't know, right? And we won't know until some time has gone by, right? Because our next federal election is going to be in 2 years, right? We're going to have probably some state elections that occur before that. What if the political pendulum swings toward the Republican Party in those other elections? Well, then it probably wasn't a critical election, right? An election that shows a realignment of the populace behind one party from another party, right? If we're seeing variance from election to election, we're probably not seeing a critical election. But let's say that speculatively, right, this election at the federal level, where Democrats have done, got the presidency and a few other Senate seats, let's say it's the front end of a change, right? And we see now 2 years down the road, more Democrats being elected in Congress, and we see Democrats being elected at the state level, more Democrats, right? It's becoming pervasive in the different states. And then the next election, we see more of that. And the next election, we see more of that. At some point down the road, 6, 8 years down the road, we can look back and say, 2020, that election, that was a critical election. That election revealed, right, a large number of Americans at the state and federal level as voters started supporting the Democratic Party. It revealed a party realignment. The Republicans were losing control, and it lost enough control, enough support, and the Democrats picked it up that they're moving forward and the Republicans are moving downhill. So a critical election is when we can make that discernment that a realignment has happened. And that party realignment means there's been a durable change, and durable is the key word here, change in party affiliation. In other words, Republicans are becoming Democrats. Libertarians are becoming Democrats, and they're going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. So a party realignment, for us to know it, means we have to see that it's durable, which means paying attention over multiple elections. If we see a durable party realignment, then we can go back to the first election where that realignment was identifiable and define that as the critical election. So you don't see critical elections all that often because it takes a while to know what they are. And right, once you do, you're past that point. We see, right, if you look back to the early 90s at the federal level, you see the Republican Party, right, starting to become, right, a dominant player at the congressional and presidential levels routinely. And we looked at 1992, 1994 elections and the federal level to say that there was probably a critical election there. For the Democrats, right, that their critical election that you can point to, you can go back, right, to Roosevelt, Franklin. You can go again looking at the late 60s, right, early 60s, and seeing the support shift over there. And then you see, right, the Democratic Party in charge of Congress for 40 or 50 years. Okay, that's durable, right? And so we've tended to look at elections and look at party strength by looking at elections and seeing when there are critical elections and who the ascendant and descendant party is in those situations. So durable party change, a realignment, right, is important because it signals to us what policies and what ideals are going to be successful in government going forward. One of the things, though, we're starting to see today, right, is not, I'm sorry, get you over here to the right, durable, to the party realignment where we see durable shifts in allegiance between parties. And right, we see them last, in other words, for a period of time. Right, and that makes an impact. That's useful. It helps us understand where we're going. The one thing I left out was this middle point here about parties are more distinct ideologically. What that means is that when we categorize a political party on the ideological spectrum, like I was showing you with the whiteboard a while ago, right? Those parties are moving away from each other, right? They're more distinct from one another. They're not as close to the center line, which tells us that they're going to be offering up different ideas about what's good for government. In Texas, right, when we look at that, we're in a period of party allegiance to the Republican Party, right? We had the Republican Party in the start in the late 70s, early 80s, showing some coalescence around the group as a party. And then by the early 90s, the Republican Party is the ascendant party in Texas. And the Democratic Party, right, is not holding many, if any, statewide elected offices. Those are all going to Republicans. And we're still in that position, right? We've seen some inroads made from the Democratic Party as far as the last U.S. Senate election where we saw Beto and Cruz run a very, very competitive election, and Cruz, pretty much eking out a win in that sense, in a election that should have probably been a lot more certain for Cruz. Beto made it questionable whether Cruz would win or not. At that time, you start hearing people say, "Oh, Texas is going purple," right? And what they're saying is that this is the beginning of a realignment, and we're moving that direction. And if you look at Cruz and you look at Beto running for that office, there's a marked political distinction about what they stand for and what they're running for as a political platform. So, right, maybe that realignment is happening. Maybe Texas will go purple. Maybe Democrats in the future will start to win state office, but it still remains to be seen. What we are seeing probably more effectively across the nation at state levels is party de-alignment. And this means that folks are not using political parties as the basis for identifying themselves as voters. And we see some pretty strong evidence of that when we're interviewing people and we get wishy-washy answers from them, right? I say, so, what party did you find yourself as belonging to? And you get people go, well, generally I would think of myself this way, but okay. When you get that kind of answer, people are kind of distancing themselves from saying, I belong to this party or that party. So your party loyalty is starting to decline. And that's not good for any political party. Because what it means when they define themselves that way, they're not saying, I'm moving from party A to party B. They're saying, well, neither party A nor party B is really working for me right now. And so when you hear people give that kind of answer to that type of question, the other thing you're going to start to look at right away is, well, are you an independent? Are you defining yourself as an independent? And what we see in Texas, and we see in a lot of the states right now, is a massive switch from identifying with a political party to identifying as an independent with no political party. Right now, I say it that way because there is historically a group called the American Independent Party. That's not what people are saying. They're not saying I belong to that. I don't belong to that American Independent Party. Today, a lot of people are saying I am independent of political parties. In other words, I'm not loyal to either one, right? I'm not sure which party really works for me right now. I know what I want maybe, and I look at those parties and I don't see either one of them representing me. I look to the candidates and the candidates' policy positions and don't see either one of them or any of the 3 or 4 of them representing me. And a lot of these folks, right, that are identifying themselves as independents, and in some places that's upwards of 40% of the electorate right now doing that. We hear things from them along the line of, I'm making my decisions on the type of person they are and right, the sincerity as a person, and do I trust them as a person, not based upon the party they are identifying with, the party they're running for, or the party that I don't identify with, right? So when you start hearing people parse out their justifications for who they vote for based on the individual and their attributes as opposed to the party, that's a sign of de-alignment from party affiliation, right? That's people saying, don't really care whether they're Republican, Democrat, Green, or Independent. I'm trying to pick the best person, right? And parties don't want to hear that. That's saying that they're not as critical as they used to be to giving cues to people and how they're going to vote, right? So in that sense, it's a bit of a problem, right? The other thing that we see here is that as a result of this, what we would expect to see and do see actually in government is more divided government. And so a divided government is government where the main institutions of government are controlled by different parties. So if you go back to when President Trump was in office, right, you had the House at the federal level controlled by the Democratic Party, the Senate controlled by the Republican Party, and the presidency controlled by the Republican Party, right? All of the majority in the Senate and the president were all Republican. But the House majority was Democrat. So the government was divided, its main institutions, between the political parties. Well, that tells you that the voters, right, are making different decisions, and maybe not party-oriented decisions. They might be picking people, regardless of party, because the government doesn't reflect, right, a party in control. Right now, we are in a position, if you look at the federal level, of a unified government, right? The House, the Senate, just by the very least amount of margins, right, and the presidency are all controlled by the Democratic Party. Generally speaking, right, we would look at something like that at a national perspective and say, it's clear the will of the people is that it wants the policies and perspectives of Democrats to be decisive going forward in national policy. However, right, when you really look at the Senate, it's divided between the parties evenly. 50 are in the Democratic Party and its affiliates, and 50 are Republican Party. And because of that perfect split, the vice president, who's Democrat, gets to come across and shift the balance when the vote is tied. We don't see that in Texas, right? The governor is Republican. The leader, the Senate has got a majority of Republicans. The House has a majority of Republicans. The Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor are Republicans, right? So Texas is nowhere in the neighborhood of being a divided government, right? We're a Republican government right now, or that party is firmly in control here. Not so at the national level, right? The other way around. But when that's happening, you see a government that's split between the parties. That tells you that people are not settled on what they believe and which party they think is effective. It tells you that you expect less to happen out of government because, right, there's no political majority across the institutions. And I would think that this is probably a more accurate description at the national level, right, of where we are. We're probably seeing party de-alignment than we are realignment. And so, if that's the case, then the Democratic hold right now at the federal level is probably tenuous at best, right? And we probably didn't see a critical election, right, in this last election. Does this make sense? All right. So we got about 10 or so minutes left. Let's talk about the next way of looking at political parties and what they ought to be doing. When we looked at the rational party model from David Easton, we're looking at how we expect parties to operate if they're serious about their commitment to winning elections. The responsible party model comes at devising expectations for political parties from a really different perspective. It's not from how parties should act to win, it's how parties should act to be more effective in supporting democracy. What is it that our democracy at the state level or our democracy at the national level needs for parties to do? And this is important because when we think about how we as voters look at political parties, a lot of this model is sitting in the back of our heads, right? So let's talk about what it means first and then how it works for us, right? How we use this. If we're going to have the best functioning party system, right, to affirm and support a democratic republic, the idea, and this was developed by a group of political scientists working through the American Political Science Association, came up with this theory, this model, and laid it out there and said, here's what democracy needs parties to do. If we're going to have a strong democratic system, we need this. We need political parties to get out there and be very explicit about what they stand for, what they want to do, how they want to govern, right? We need the Democratic Party to explain to us, we're the Democratic Party, these are our goals for the state or the country, and here's what we want to do. Voters need to be able to hear that, see it, understand it, internalize it, and say, okay, I know that to be a Democrat means to espouse these ideas. And then we need the Republican Party and the Green Party and the Libertarian Party to do the exact same thing. Give us a distinct, comprehensive overview of who you are and how you want to run government, right? So that we as voters can have a clear idea of the differences between the parties we have competing for office. So think about that. Do parties do that a little bit? The second thing we need is for then candidates running for office to embrace that distinct, comprehensive program the party they identify with has laid out there. So in other words, the Democratic Party says we stand for these things, and anybody that's running for office as a did I say Democrat? Democratic Party, then the Democratic candidate will say, I believe and will try to do these things my party has laid out, right? I'm a Democrat. That's the Democratic platform. You elect me to office, I'm going to do those things. In the main, right? That doesn't mean that they have to be perfectly, exactly committed to every plank of local political party, but you should be able to look at what a candidate's saying for what they support, and without knowing the party they've identified with, right? Just listening to them, you should be, oh, that's the Democratic Party platform. That must be a Democrat running for office, right? Democracy needs parties to lay out a clear, comprehensive plan. Democracy, if it's going to work, needs candidates that embrace that plan, that program. That allows voters then to go to the polls and vote upon that and rely upon that. And what happens then is that if the parties do that and the candidates do that and the voters pay attention, then the people that get elected to office and form a majority, right, whichever party that's from, right, are all on the same page, right? Hey, we're Democrats, we just got elected to office, right, in Georgia, or we're Republicans, we just got elected to office in Texas. Here was our plan. Let's do it, right? We're all Republicans in Texas that got elected. Let's go forward, right? We're the majority. We've got us, right, roadmap ahead of us of how we're going to run government based on what we promised as candidates. And then at the end of the day, that party that's in the majority has to own what they got completed or didn't get completed when they had control of government. Right? As a majority party, your job is to get the things done that your voters wanted. Did you? This is called the responsible party model because the party is responsible for defining themselves, getting candidates out there that reflect those definitions, as a party organizing themselves in government to implement that, get that policy passed, and then be able to stand on their record as the majority party saying, we promised you X, Y, Z, we delivered X, Y, Z, or not, right, and why. The minority side of this, right, the group that's in the minority, their job is, the same at the beginning with the program and the candidates. But once the elections are over and they figure out they're in the minority in government, their job is to, right, play the opposition role and say, okay, y'all are running for this. This is what you're going to try and make government do as a majority party. But have you thought about this? Wouldn't this be better for America? Shouldn't we do this in Texas? Right? And continually define themselves as saying, right, the majority party is not living up to their ideas and goals. And if you replaced them with us in the next election, we would. Right? So they need to keep defining themselves in opposition. This is good in a democratic system because voters are given a clear currency of what a party stands for and what they're going to do. And they can take that to the polls and put that into place and then evaluate those parties successful or not successful, right, experience while they're in government, and use the next election as a grade or a barometer of that party's, right, effectiveness. And if they say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they deliver X, and that's not good enough, maybe, right, you're holding those parties responsible. You'll go a different direction with your vote the next time. And so this makes parties work toward what the majority of people need and want. Okay. Any questions about the responsible party model and how it's really a different perspective of looking at what parties are supposed to do and go about their business than the rational party model? I will take your quietness as a sign that you understand. Crickets, yes, grasshoppers, crickets. That's right. Does that actually mean yes? This is me being not up on my means understood. Okay, did not know that. Now I understand. Crickets and grasshoppers mean understand. Okay, very good. Got to get with the lingo, right? Oh, there's probably a meme out there about professors that missed the conversation, right? Of emojis, and that would be me. All right, so no questions. We'll call it a day, and we'll get back at it on Thursday, same time, right? Same place, same bat channel. And remember, tomorrow is office hours from 3 to 4. If any of you want or need to jump in and talk to me, you don't have to wait for them, but just reminding you of the time. And you all have a good day.
Thank you, Professor. You too. See you, everybody.